I lived beside him for 36 years, but the land behind our house had not carried my name for the last 10. Inside the wooden cabinet beneath the stairs, I found a folded contract marked with $1. At the bottom, his signature sat beside the name of a man who once ate Thanksgiving dinner at our table. I clutched the armrest. My feet stayed frozen to the tile floor. It felt like something had been pulled out of me, something warm and beating. It was as if I had been erased. What if the person you trusted most had prepared your absence before they asked you to leave? Her name was Martha Delaney. She was 67 years old, with soft grey hair that curled at the ends and hands shaped by decades of cataloguing books in the town library. She had retired 2 years before. The kind of quiet retirement people dream of tea at sunrise. Puzzles by the window. Tomatoes planted in rows behind the porch. She and her husband, Howard Delaney, had lived in the same ranch-style house on the outskirts of Luray, Virginia, for almost 4 decades. The house was simple but solid. It sat on 6 acres of land passed down from Howard's father. To Martha, the soil felt like home. Howard had once built a wooden bench under the poplar tree. Just for her, she would sit there with her knitting and think, "This is where I belong." She had spent her whole adult life being careful with money, with people, with words, but she had not been careful with the one thing that mattered most. She trusted him. At first, the changes were small. Howard stopped mentioning the bills. He took longer in the garage. He kept a zippered folder with him. Even to the grocery store, Martha asked once. When she noticed a utility bill addressed to someone else, a name she didn't recognize. "It's nothing," Howard said. "Just a friend helping with the land paperwork." The name was Douglas R. Fenley. She remembered that name later. Martha never pressed. She didn't want to pry. That wasn't her way. She believed marriage was built on trust. And she wore that belief like an old coat, even when the seams began to split. But the signs kept coming. A new envelope with a legal seal. A property tax statement missing from the kitchen drawer. When she opened the filing cabinet where they usually kept their records, half the folders were gone. She told herself it was a mistake, or maybe Howard had just reorganized. Still, the silence grew. Then came the afternoon when the truth came quietly. It was late October. A sharp wind had started rolling through the valley. Martha was pulling out scarves and gloves from the storage closet under the stairs. One of the boxes tipped sideways, and something fell behind it. She reached down and pulled out a thick manila envelope. It had no label, just a paperclip and 3 pages inside. She sat down on the floor and unfolded the papers. The first page was a contract. Parcel C, $1, to satisfy private debt owed by Howard Delaney. The buyer was Douglas R. Fenley, dated 6 months ago. Her eyes moved to the second page. A clause was highlighted in faint yellow: seller retains exclusive right to repurchase within 2 years. Her chest tightened. She turned to the last page. Howard's signature, Douglas's signature, no mention of her. The transaction had already happened. The land was gone, but not really. It had only been handed off temporarily, as if Howard had planned to sell it just long enough to pretend it was no longer part of their marriage, long enough to keep it from being divided. There had been no debt, no crisis, just a scheme. He had staged a fake burden to move something valuable out of her reach, then planned to take it back once she was no longer legally entitled to it. She could not remember standing up, but she found herself in the kitchen, the envelope still in her hand. The room felt colder, or maybe she was colder. She looked at the spot by the window where she used to watch him mow the grass. How many Saturdays had she stood there, thinking they were building something side by side? Shock made no noise. It made everything quiet. I did not scream. I just went still, like my skin had turned to glass. My arms were numb, like I had been holding something for hours. But I could not remember what. Her hands trembled. The papers shook like dry leaves. She dropped one. It slid across the floor. Landing by the refrigerator, she walked to the phone on the wall, picked it up, placed it down, picked it up again, 5 times. She did not dial. She did not even cry. She only moved. as if her body had not yet realized what her mind had seen. Then she sat, the contract on her knees, the room silent again, and then a sound, her own voice, quiet and dry. Maybe that's why he always called it just land. Because to him, I was never meant to stay. Some betrayals do not arrive as storms. They unfold in silence, beneath years of shared routines, disguised as paperwork. The real reason Martha lost her share of the land was not the forged debt or the quiet transaction. It was something deeper. She had surrendered her place in the financial story of her marriage long before any court date. When you stop asking questions about what you legally own, you invite someone else to write your ending. Howard's actions were deliberate. He crafted a fake debt, executed a private sale, and made sure the buyer was a trusted friend. There was no money exchanged, no emergency to justify the sale, just a cold calculation if he moved the land out of reach before the divorce. It would never be subject to division. That is what the law often calls property fraud between spouses, a strategy that uses the appearance of legality to commit quiet theft. But Martha Walt, too, played a role, not in deceit but in silence. For years, she had never read the tax statements. She had never asked whose name was on the title. She assumed that being married meant being included. She believed that honesty was automatic, and that love was a kind of legal protection. But that is not how marriage works. Not under the law, and not in life. When a woman allows all decisions about property to happen outside her view, she becomes vulnerable to something far more damaging than infidelity. She becomes a bystander to unauthorized transfer of marital assets, something that happens every day across the country. It is quiet, legal-looking, and devastating. What Martha did next mattered. She gathered the documents, every piece of mail, every photocopy, every handwritten note Howard had left behind. Then she found a local attorney, one who had handled financial infidelity cases involving older women in rural divorces. Together, they built a case. They filed a formal petition asking the court to examine the land sale. The key argument: it was not a real transaction. It was a maneuver meant to avoid fair distribution. The sale had been for $1. The buyer had not made any payments. The seller retained rights to repurchase. These were red flags, not of desperation, but deception. The attorney filed for an emergency freeze on the property. This step blocked Howard from reclaiming or reselling the land during the proceedings. Then, they issued a subpoena for Douglas Fenley. Under oath, he admitted there had been no intention of keeping the land. He had agreed to hold it until the divorce was over. That was enough. The court ruled the transaction invalid. The judge cited identity deception in marriage not in the literal sense of stolen names, but in the misuse of shared identity to commit financial harm. The land was reinstated as marital property, and Martha She received her rightful share. It did not undo the betrayal, but it rewrote the outcome. Sometimes justice arrives not with anger, but with evidence, and the courage to bring it forward. After the ruling, Martha did not celebrate. She did not throw anything away or toast anything new. She packed her dishes carefully, one by one, wrapped in old newspapers. Then she called her younger sister, Ruth, who lived in the Shenandoah Hills. "I think I'd like to start again," she said. She sold her share of the property through a verified sale. No hidden terms, no $1 games. With that money, she bought a small home in Ruth's neighborhood, 2 bedrooms, 1 old fireplace, no land to argue over. Her new house sat at the edge of a slope. On mornings when the fog rolled in from the valley, she would sit on her porch with a blanket across her knees and a warm mug between her hands. No papers to sign, no folders kept from her, just silence she could trust. She began painting again, not for anyone else, just small oils, sunflowers, streams, a wooden gate, scenes that did not change their meaning. And when Howard called not to apologize, but to argue about court costs, she let it ring. She listened to it stop. She did not save his message. She no longer needed closure from him. The court had given her something better, a line in the file, that said this land was never his alone. That line mattered. It had taken her nearly 4 decades and one broken contract to realize that protection is not a gift, it is a habit. Martha did not reclaim everything, but she reclaimed the part of herself that believed she could live without asking for permission. Some women heal by forgiving. She healed by finishing the paperwork. And if you're listening, if you are a woman who shares a house, or land, or a joint account, start by pulling out the records. Print the title deed, read the clauses, ask whose name is listed, ask how many times it has changed. Do not assume it is love if you are not allowed to ask questions. If you suspect that something is missing a signature, a copy, a balance, do not wait for a fight. Walk into your county clerk's office and request the last transaction. Ask for it printed, stamped, and signed. It is not paranoia, it is protection. And if someone hands you a form and says, "Just sign here," take a breath, then ask for a copy and read it in a room without them in it. You are not being difficult. You are refusing to be erased. And if this story echoes something inside, you send this video to a friend. Ask her if she's ever checked her own land records. Ask her if she knows where the deeds are. And if you have no one else to ask here. This channel is built for that. We do not tell stories to scare you. We tell them because silence is where these stories begin.